Been doing this for about 4 years now, each month, and trying to bring forward some stories that might be relevant for you in protecting your business. And today we're gonna follow the same sort of theme. We've got an agenda up here on the screen, but rather than throwing dozens of stories at you, I'm really going to throw 1 or 2 stories at you and then talk about solutions. And the themes to some degree are getting repetitive in that when you read a news story, they oftentimes fall into one of the following buckets: business email compromise, ransomware, and identity theft, or just general vulnerabilities. So what we're going to kind of do, and I threw on the agenda, the frequency with which we're seeing these things at either customer or accounts that are coming to us. We're literally seeing business email compromise continue to occur about once a week, right? Where people are sending money somewhere. We're seeing ransomware occurring twice a month at this point. In fact, the last couple of weeks has been more like once a week. Where at a customer we know or a prospect or someone who we were going to do some work with is calling us saying all of our servers and workstations are locked up. That has come on very strongly recently. Identity breaches, right? We see that up at our service desk where we're actually chartered to look for accounts. We're seeing identity where people are logging in as one of their users. We see that once a week, right? We notify them, they go through a password change, then we go through breaches and so forth. But just to let you know, this stuff is happening frequently. So what we're going to kind of do, just to be a little different this week is, or this month, is also go through a self-assessment. So I might ask you to get out or have nearby little pen and paper and get your math skills ready, right? You're going to have to add up to at most 25. So hopefully get your calculators out if you need to also. All right, first area of business was business email compromise. And business email compromise, as we all know, is typically where funds get redirected. And lo and behold, this month's story is on the poor location of Puerto Rico. On top of having a 13-year recession, having some bad hurricanes come through, they had some financial aid and a warehouse that was full of hurricane relief supplies that was found a month ago. Lo and behold, Puerto Rico also, their industrial development agency, one of the agencies of the government, someone in there received a business email compromise or a phishing exercise where it was asking them to redirect some money. Specifically alleging a change to a bank account tied to remittance payments. In response, the agency transferred the funds to the fake account. It happened in January and it was discovered 30 days later from an audit perspective. $2.6 million. Okay. Pictured there in the upper left, in case you're ever curious, that's actually $2 million, so they're a little shy there, but it's the only picture I could find. But poor Puerto Rico, right? And they've got a lot of things that kind of got beat down on around. So business email compromise still occurring, happens to organizations often, and specifically within accounts that we're aware of. You hear about them infrequently, right? Because a lot of people don't say anything, or like in Puerto Rico's case, they only found it because it was audited later on. Hey, I didn't receive that 2.6 million. Oh, I sent it to you. Yeah, well, you sent it to the wrong spot. So, what are some solutions for this? I call these basics, right? And we're not doing an assessment in this particular area, but certainly in the people and process area, just have a good process for patching, right? That certainly is one area of it. And it sounds easy. I make it sound, I glorify over it, but when asking questions of your patching process, would you have things done within 30 days, or how do you know which servers are covered by your patching policy? Are all your workstations part of a policy? Do you reboot? What tools do you use to report on those? Do you use third-party patching? There's a number of things I could be asking, but for now, we're just going to study people and process and know that these 6 things, having some antivirus and good antivirus that is well updated, having a security awareness plan, having good internet security, where people are going, maybe stopping them from going to particular locations, especially behind your firewall, but ideally for people out in the field, not in your firewall. evaluating who's logging into your Office 365, taking a look at audit logs, making sure that your Office 365 is in a good spot, and maybe even looking out on the dark web for compromises that may have occurred from some of the identities in your organization. So @peters.com should be monitored for any identities that show up on the dark web. In any case, all of those are basics. You have to be doing these things in order to protect yourself from business email compromise. We're not assessing you today, but ask yourself, am I checking all of those boxes? And furthermore, outside of people and process, a piece of technology that I would tend to throw at this, and I would say is very, very key to solving business email compromise problems, is either a technology like Microsoft Office 365 ATP, which is pictured here, or you could use Mimecast, or you could use Zix, or you could use, other third-party vendors that basically provide zero-day compromises, meaning attachments that aren't scanned by your typical scanner, and also help from a phishing perspective. In this particular case, and this is illustrating Microsoft ATP, they're actually looking for who you know. And are you receiving emails from a strange person or someone who appears very similar to, let's say, Sarah, who's a CEO, your CEO for your company? Are they doing a Sarah impersonation, either with a slight variance on the display name or a slight variance on the domain name? And they're stopping those emails from even being received by you or from you clicking on the links that are there. So there's a lot of technology that can be thrown at it, but people and process are equally important to stopping business email compromise. Enough of my diatribe on that. Let's move to the next topic of ransomware. One story here, poor city of Racine, Wisconsin, right? And this could be anybody, but let's just pick on Racine, Wisconsin, because they're in the north here, and they're probably Green Bay fans. But the story is that the city of Racine was hit with ransomware. This was a few weeks ago, actually, and they're still out of service. It took about a week and a half, at least. The claim from the mayor there, Corey Mason, is that, hey, we're still working on things, still providing core services, but they call it back to the 90s, right? Here we go back to the 90s. We have our analog services still working. Another way of describing all of our digital services, anything on a computer or data is down. So they're able to recover and have some continuity to their business, but the good news for them was their backup data was not touched, and therefore it looks like they're going to be able to recover. Interestingly, though, because they have their insurer involved, the insurer is trying to make sure that it kind of has things in a frozen state while they go through some cybersecurity checks, and so they can't quite recover from tapes yet because their insurer is kind of dictating the timeline by which they come back. So it's an interesting note as to what role insurance plays in the recovery effort. They have the ability to recover technically, but their insurer kind of wants to make sure everything is square and no additional data has leaked out prior to doing so. So that's our one story, and actually I'll supplement that with another one here in a moment. If you were attending last month to this month in cyber, we walked through a slide that was similar to this, right? And we believe that, in the crawl, walk, run phase, there are several things that can be done to make you ransomware ready. Okay, and there's some basic things under the crawl. There's some we'll call it advanced things under the walking. By advanced, I don't mean to give it any sort of name of, oh, that's not for our organization, right? These are still walking type technologies or processes that you feel should be done. And then obviously there's some organizations that are doing some running. But this is an area where, without diving into too much detail on each of those, again, to rehash that, you can always go to last month's blog on this topic if desired. Instead, I'm going to kind of ask you to assess on those areas in just a moment. But let me tell you another story here in the ransomware business, because this is real life. In the last 2 weeks, a mid-sized organization, about 500 users, half of the environment is still Windows 7. They've got a number of servers that are out there. Some are Windows 2008. have some antivirus software technology. Yes, they do backups, but probably not as well as they could. All of these things. Generally, you're pretty typical environment, though there certainly were some signals when they were having some early conversations with us that there probably were, some things underserved. Let's say if you don't have a really strong backup scenario, or if you're not sure if your antivirus, if you don't have a centralized antivirus console that tells you, yeah, I'm okay across every server I know about, if you're not really on top of some of the basics, you might be subject to some problems. And indeed, from a ransomware readiness perspective, next gen firewall, yeah, they have one, but couldn't really point to the console. And so I'm kind of ranking, if I was ranking them on 1, 3, or 5 points on the items on the left column. They have malware, but didn't have a centralized console for things. They had some backup, but they weren't exactly, they had done no testing to determine if they could recover from that, either system testing or data. They often just rebuilt things. They have a patching policy, but it was really mostly focused on workstations, servers. They kind of got to as they could. They tried to do it as quickly as possible, but people were overburdened. And from an admin perspective, there were several people that had admin accounts and so forth, and no multi-factor authentication was used. So I kind of ranked them, and it should be no surprise that from a points perspective, if I gave them 1 point for each of those areas, arguably in some areas potentially they could have been 0, they were low out of 25 points. I'm going to ask you to kind of walk you quickly through your basic ransomware readiness. And again, jot down, and we'll anonymously poll you here in just a moment. But for a next-gen firewall, you can give yourself a point if you've got a new next-gen firewall that's probably been acquired in the last 3 years. Give yourself 3 points if you've got a console that's up and running and you see active threats that are happening against your environment. Give yourself 5 points if not only do you have those items, but you also update that firewall at least quarterly. On the next line, antivirus, do you have something that's recent, that's meant to protect against zero-day threats? Do you have a console where you can centrally see things? And do you update your malware, at least daily across your environment? On the backup line, yes, you own backup and you have a product from this century. Great. Do you test your recovery of that? And do you have offline backups stored somewhere where they're unavailable for someone to delete? Again, that would be 5 points at the latest. Servers. So on the patching, do you do workstations less than 30 days? 3 points if you give servers in less than 30 days. 5 points if you're doing out of band patches, meaning Microsoft comes up with an emergency patch next week and you're able to distribute that out to your servers in a quick fashion. An admin policy, there's a lot of things we could say here, but at a minimum, let's just make sure that your administrator accounts are separate from the accounts that you typically log in from. Let's make sure you also have a limited number of those accounts. Let's make sure that you have multi-factor authentication turned on for Office 365 for at least those admin accounts. And let's say that you're taking a look at those activities of those admins. Give yourself 5 points if you're looking at those activities on a random or a periodic basis. All of that said, add up those points. In some lines, you might be 1, some 3, some 5, and this is where your math comes in. Use the calculator next to you and see if we can get it up to 25 points, or how many out of 25 were you? I guess at this time, Samantha, if you don't mind sharing a poll, that would be great. We're just going to keep that open for like 15 seconds. Just get a general sense. Again, this is completely anonymous. These are the basics for ransomware readiness. And why don't we close the poll in 10 seconds here, and we'll share the results on screen. Again, anonymous, no harm done. This is just for you to kind of self-assess and see where things are at. Samantha, what do you have? I don't see the polling results, but that's because I'm sharing my screen. But as long as those are out there, that's great. Samantha, is there anything further we need to see?
Looks like they're all voted up, and we have 33% at 2025 basic ransomware ready. We have 22% at 10 to 19 at basic ransomware optimistic, and then less than 10, we have 44% ready to have an issue. So a lot of people looking to get some questions answered. So glad to
Okay.
have you guys here.
Yeah, well, it doesn't surprise me, right? These are the basics for ransomware readiness, and I guess ransomware is scary enough to me, and that's why I figured we'd dedicate a little bit of time this month to. I'm seeing what these organizations are doing. They're spending, $50, $100, $200,000, and those are realistic figures that they're paying either to us or to other forensic providers. For recovery from these issues. And so I thought it would be worthwhile to also talk about advanced ransomware readiness. I don't have a story about organizations doing this, but I just thought I'd walk you through. So keep that same paper out and let's talk about some other things that could be done. From an email perspective, the email coming into your inbox is huge, right? The zero-day threats and the ability for someone to take an attachment that had a problem and modify it slightly and make it your next problem, that can be no longer signature detected. So those are called zero-day threats, meaning it's a brand new issue within the attachment. And so those zero-day threats are difficult to protect against with normal email hygiene services. So something like Microsoft ATP or Mimecast or Secure Labs or Zix, those are the types of solutions that are what I'd call advanced protection. And so give yourself a point if you have those. Give yourself 3 points if it's also protecting links that are coming in so that users that might click on a malicious link, it's blocking that link from occurring. And furthermore, if you know that it has technology for protecting from phishing, give yourself 5 points. Okay. Advanced email protection is a very strong candidate what can be done, but it's not a basic, right? It's really something more that you're buying to say, I really need to protect against ransomware. Security review for Office 365. Now that's our naming for our service, but in general, is your Office 365, is it kind of default? When you had it installed, if it was multiple years ago, have you had it reviewed for some of the bad defaults that are that Microsoft has in there from a security perspective, or have you turned some of the dials to make things better? So give yourself, and this is kind of it's up to your own quantitative assessment, but are you looking at 1, 3, or 5 points? So where you sit from a 365 posture, there's about 40 to 60 knobs that we turn and evaluate with regards to Office 365, especially from a default installation. And then furthermore, looking at your logs on a daily basis to determine who's logging into your Office 365 and why is user Josie suddenly logging in from outside of country? That means Josie's email or her credentials were compromised and oftentimes needs to have a password change real time. So in any case, line 7, just kind of give yourself 1 to 5 points depending on where you sit if Office 365 is even relevant. If you don't have Office 365, give yourself 5 points. For port scans, a lot of people are doing port scans or vulnerability scans on an annual basis, either because their insurer wants to do so or and so forth. Annually, if you're doing them annually like you've always done it, give yourself a point. But ironically, we're finding people are moving this up to either quarterly, weekly, monthly, or even more often. And so with the frequency of that, evaluate that. One of the things we're finding on port scans is that RDP, one of the ports, is being exploited for executing ransomware. So if you're evaluating changes in your port opens and you see that RDP is suddenly open from a new IP address, that would be an indicator that soon ransomware may be coming your way. And so that's why that's an important variable. Security awareness, relatively doesn't need a lot of description. If you're doing it annually or for new employees only, give yourself a point. but there's certainly a lot more that can be done, including online and testing. And 10th, internet security. If you're doing some URL filtering at the firewall, or URL filtering in general, great. If it's just performed at the firewall, give yourself 3 points. If it also includes remote users, give yourself 5. This is another strong area. Organizations are highly distributed nowadays, and with that, it's important to do it for all users. So again, total out of 25 points. Samantha, if you don't mind sharing the poll, we'll keep this open for 10 seconds. And again, anonymous findings. And this is going to kind of close out our ransomware, but just kind of give people a perspective on where they sit, where their peers sit with regards to advanced ransomware readiness. And keep in mind, obviously, there's more things that can be done in this space. Keep it open for another 5 seconds or here or so. And, appreciate you listening and giving some feedback on where you sit and kind of being realistic about it. All right, Samantha, why don't you close the poll and share some results out? Again, I can't see it, so.
All right, just to walk through it, nobody was 20 to 25 ransomware ready, but we did have about 40% of those polled who answered who are ransomware optimistic. And then for the less than 10 ransomware ready to have an issue, we had about 60% of those polled answered there. So
okay, building a little bit, right? Yeah, building a little bit from their basic world. So again, just thought we'd take a little extra time this month to dive into ransomware because it has been pretty prolific. Last but not least, we're going to talk about identity theft. This is another space where I guess my story for the month is Citrix. They've been in the news a little bit recently over the last few months, but specifically a good article came out from Krebs on security, which is referenced in the bottom right. Citrix has a very large footprint in businesses today. They had a patch recently that was, of high importance to implement, and really that patch was to fix a hole that had been exposed in their organization between 2018 and 2019. A technique was used called password spraying, where a large number of usernames with common passwords were effectively, because of some port availability, they were able to look across their Active Directory and try to see who had the same common password within their user base. From there, continue exploiting, do some what they call lateral movements, and find people with escalated privileges, and all information within Citrix with regards to their employees was leaked, healthcare information, and so on and so forth. And so this was a major black mark, if you will, for Citrix. But the part I think I want to focus on this month is just the password spraying aspect, right? And I'm going to use this very cryptic drawing to kind of talk about things. For our users within our organization, or you for your organization, you have Active Directory. You've had it for years, and it's at least one spot where login credentials are kept. Recently, you may or may not have moved some of those credentials, likely in a copy or synchronized mode, to Azure Active Directory, represented here with the cloud. Okay, and these are major databases with your login credentials. Okay, and they're usually kept in sync. I'm just going to kind of walk you through some solutions around identity. Okay. You have great policies for your Active Directory. You've had them for years. You use complexity, right? And you might have upper and lower characters and some kind of change schedule, and your users complain that it's too much, too often, and you have service accounts in there and admin accounts in there, but in any case, you likely have that. However, even with complexity, this passes all your complexity rules and your length rules. Pass at word 1. It's got a complex character, uppercase, lowercase, and a numeric. But everyone would agree that that's a terrible password, right? In fact, that's a common password that would be on a ban list, okay? So a lot of people are moving and protecting what passwords can get created with global ban lists, as well as with maybe customized ban lists. We don't want any passwords here with Peters in it. How about the Chicago Bears? How about the Hawks, right? There might be certain words that you customize ban as well as a global list ban. And that is going to help from a password spraying perspective as an example. So Azure password protection is one thing that can be used. And a lot of people think they see the word Azure and they're like, oh, it's clearly a cloud offering. No, this is against your Active Directory and your on-prem. So I kind of put things on the left or on the right, depending on where they're implemented, just to kind of help everyone understand some solutions in this marketplace. From a process perspective, obviously you onboard and offboard vendors, users, employees, and so forth. And so those processes are very important. So I want to point out some processes that are important here too. There's obviously things like privileged access, those lateral movements that I talked about, people that are dwelling or sitting on your network, people that are enumerating servers, meaning they're looking around and saying, hey, what are all my server names? Okay, that would be a very unusual activity. And if any of these activities occur, lateral movements, enumerating servers, LDAP logins, devices that are joining or not joining the domain, it'd be nice to know about those. And so technologies like ATA or Microsoft's Azure ATP, and again, another bad name, are looking at your Active Directory, your on-prem directory, for nefarious activities. Then over in the cloud space, things like your global admins. How many global admins do you have, right? Have you limited the number? Is it a separate login from user? Do you audit the usage of those accounts? Who got added to the global admin group this month? Things of that nature. Are you leveraging multi-factor authentication, which again takes their login password and now an additional factor, usually tied in with the phone, although there can be things like certificates or other things to leverage tokens that can be used to implement multi-factor authentication. Maybe you don't want it on all the time, so there might be conditions when you want to have MFA. Certain apps, certain locations, certain times of day, as an example, might be interesting. So we have a one-day MFA just to help people experience that in a lightweight manner, certainly turn it on for your global admins and kind of get you jump-started in that regard. We have assessments that we do on identity. Identity is involved in 70% of the breaches. At some point, had a compromised credential. Microsoft's on record saying 99.9% of the time, if you're using MFA, you're not going to have a problem on an account. There's things called Azure Identity Protection, which is constantly looking at the identities within your Office 365, trying to surface if they've seen them out on the dark web or there are other issues with it. Imagine how that coupled with your global admin accounts might be logical. A lot of times from a functionality perspective, there's a lot of needs to do self-service password resets or single sign-on to other applications or security groups. These are all possible using some of the Microsoft technologies. And last but not least, from a visibility perspective, there are services like ours that do the Office 365 security review, where we're seeing some of those suspicious logins on a daily basis on behalf of our customers. And there's also databases that can take not only your Active Directory information or Azure AD information, but your firewall information and your wireless and your backup and your antivirus, and kind of log aggregate and look for common breaches that might be occurring amongst all of those sources. So a lot to be said. I kind of just assembled this slide because it was just a brain dump, if you will, of how to protect yourself. And there's a lot going on in the identity space, but this is the area to nibble at with regards to identity issues. Single slide. This is a repeat from last month. Obviously, pandemic flu is upon us. Fortunately, not in our country as much, but it's the news stories of the day. I only ask that you consider this and consider the pandemic flu planning within regards to your organization. Business continuity plans and disaster recovery plans are important for your business to survive. And we're experts at helping with regards to where that planning needs to be injected and what you can do to take concrete steps in that space. Blogs, we blog 3 times a week, so certainly check them out. There's recaps from last month, this month in cyber. We've got a number of events coming up, some security related, including Catch the Bad Guys red-handed with that SIM. So we were talking about the little database down there in the bottom right. That's a SIM service that can aggregate logs from various devices. And then we've got a number of Teams webinars that are kind of going in some depth with regards to how to secure Teams as an example. We have some services for doing some testing in some of those spaces, including the security review, port scans, security awareness. In fact, some of those are free trials that are available off our website. You'll see them listed exactly like they are. And with that, I'd just like to conclude and say, thanks very much for attending. We, look forward to always having some dialogue with you, and hopefully the topics this month, which can be repetitive, we put some solutions behind some of the stories that we're hearing in the field.